Ava and Lily Mercer were the picture of perfection, identical twin sisters with golden smiles and a bond so unbreakable it bordered on unnerving. But beneath their flawless facade was a cunning partnership fueled by greed, one that would lead to the ultimate betrayal, manipulating their reclusive uncle into a spiral of paranoia, ruin, and death. Ava and Lily Mercer were the kind of twins that people whispered about in awe. In the quiet, tree-lined streets of Camden Falls, they stood out not just for their striking resemblance but for their uncanny synchronicity. Their golden hair gleamed in the sunlight, and their every movement seemed choreographed. From their teenage years, they had been treated as local celebrities, bright, charming, and always in perfect harmony. To most, they appeared as kind-hearted and driven young women destined for success. What no one saw, however, was the dark ambition that bound them together, an ambition that would turn deadly when they fixed their sights on their uncle, Robert Mercer. Robert was a man who preferred solitude to society. After inheriting the family fortune from his late parents, he lived modestly in a sprawling house on the edge of town. Despite his wealth, he never flaunted it and rarely engaged with the community. His reclusive lifestyle had made him an object of mild curiosity in Camden Falls, but few people truly knew him. To Ava and Lily, however, Robert wasn't just a distant relative, he was an opportunity. The sisters were painfully aware that their own lives lacked the luxury and security they craved. Although they held jobs and maintained a polished outward appearance, they were drowning in debt from years of impulsive spending. Their dreams of a glamorous lifestyle felt increasingly out of reach. When they realized that Robert had no immediate family and a fortune that could easily be theirs, they began to plot. Their plan started with subtlety. They reached out to Robert under the guise of familial concern, apologizing for the years of estrangement between him and the rest of the family. They presented themselves as his last loyal kin, offering to help him with errands, keep him company, and manage the upkeep of his home. Ava and Lily knew how to play the part of the dutiful nieces, and Robert, who had spent years without meaningful connections, was grateful for their attention. The twins learned everything they could about him. They discovered his routines, his habits, and most importantly, his vulnerabilities. Robert's life was one of predictability and isolation, making him an easy target for their manipulation. Slowly, they began to steer conversations toward topics that planted seeds of doubt in his mind. They hinted at the disloyalty of his financial advisor, the selfish motives of his few acquaintances, and the potential dangers of trusting anyone but them. Robert, already cautious by nature, began to believe their narrative. The sisters became indispensable to him, visiting daily and offering to take over responsibilities that he found burdensome. They framed their actions as selfless care, but every move was calculated. Ava and Lily were methodically tightening their grip on his life, ensuring that he relied on them completely. What made their strategy so effective was their ability to play off each other seamlessly. If Ava suggested an idea, Lily would reinforce it in a way that seemed entirely organic. Their shared intuition allowed them to manipulate Robert without him ever suspecting their true motives. To him, they were the only family he could trust, the only people who had his best interests at heart. In truth, Ava and Lily were meticulously setting the stage for what they saw as their inevitable takeover of his fortune. They knew that Robert had no will and no heirs beyond them. If he were to die without making arrangements, everything he owned would legally pass to them. It wasn't a question of if they would claim his wealth, but when and how. The first step, they decided, was to isolate him further. They began encouraging him to sever ties with anyone who might challenge their influence. They suggested he let go of his longtime housekeeper, claiming she was careless and untrustworthy. When Robert hesitated, Lily reminded him of a minor incident where the housekeeper had misplaced an important document, framing it as evidence of incompetence. Robert, unsure of himself and increasingly reliant on the twins' guidance, reluctantly agreed. Next, they convinced him to sell his vacation home, insisting that it was too much of a liability for a man of his age. They argued that the upkeep was draining his resources and that he could use the funds for his future security. Robert, who had rarely used the property in recent years, saw no reason to disagree. The sale further consolidated his assets, making them easier for the twins to access when the time came. As their influence over Robert deepened, Ava and Lily began to anticipate the next phase of their plan. They knew they couldn't afford to wait indefinitely, but they also understood the importance of patience. They needed Robert to trust them completely before they could make their final move. For now, they were content to watch as the foundations of his life slowly shifted under their control, knowing that every step brought them closer to their ultimate goal. Ava and Lily's grip on their uncle tightened as they moved into the next stage of their plan. What had started as small manipulations quickly escalated into a calculated effort to isolate Robert from the outside world. They carefully constructed a narrative that made him distrust everyone but them, feeding his growing paranoia. The once reserved but rational man began to see threats where none existed, a change the sisters encouraged every step of the way. It started with subtle suggestions. Ava mentioned that his financial advisor had been seen driving a new car, implying that it was purchased with stolen funds. Lily would then express her own concerns, adding fuel to the fire. "It's better to be safe than sorry," she would say, convincing Robert to take precautionary steps. They urged him to end his relationship with the advisor and handle his finances independently, with their help, of course. Once that trust was broken, it became easier for the sisters to target others in his life. They planted suspicions about his neighbors, suggesting they were overly curious about his wealth and might try to take advantage of him. When Robert began noticing ordinary interactions, like a wave from across the street or a polite question about his garden, he interpreted them through the lens the twins had given him. Every glance became a potential threat, every interaction a possible scheme. The sisters also worked to eliminate any remaining connections he had. His housekeeper, a loyal employee of over a decade, was among the first to go. Ava pretended to discover missing items, fabricating tales of misplaced jewelry and documents. Lily, playing the role of the voice of reason, gently suggested it might be time to part ways, insisting that Robert needed someone he could fully trust. Reluctantly, he let her go, another layer of his independence stripped away. Their manipulation extended beyond people to include Robert's sense of security. They convinced him his large home in town was too exposed, too vulnerable to the supposed dangers they had fabricated. They suggested he move to a smaller, more secluded cottage on the outskirts of Camden Falls, promising it would offer him peace of mind. In truth, the isolation suited their agenda perfectly. It ensured no one would witness what was to come. Once he was settled in the remote cottage, they worked harder to control his environment. Ava volunteered to manage his mail, screening letters and discarding anything that might contradict the narrative they were feeding him. Lily took charge of his finances, ensuring that every decision passed through them first. They promised it was all for his benefit, to make his life simpler, but their true aim was to cut off every avenue of independence he had left. Robert, who had always been cautious and reserved, now found himself engulfed by an overwhelming sense of vulnerability. The twins had carefully constructed a world where he felt surrounded by unseen enemies. His paranoia grew, and with it, his reliance on Ava and Lily deepened. They were his protectors, the only people he believed he could trust in a world that now seemed hostile and unpredictable. What made the sisters' manipulation so effective was their ability to work as a seamless unit. One would plant a seed of doubt, and the other would nurture it until it took root in Robert's mind. They knew when to push and when to step back, creating the illusion that he was making his own choices. He never once suspected that the fears consuming him were entirely manufactured. The isolation began to take its toll on Robert. He stopped venturing into town, avoiding even mundane tasks like grocery shopping. The twins assured him that they would handle everything, further cementing their control. His life, once marked by quiet stability, now revolved entirely around the sisters. Behind the scenes, Ava and Lily were already plotting their next move. They had succeeded in creating an environment where Robert was entirely dependent on them, but they knew they couldn't stop there. Their end goal was control of his wealth, and while his paranoia served their purposes for now, they needed to ensure he would never regain his independence. With each passing day, Robert grew more isolated and fearful, while Ava and Lily prepared to tighten the noose. Their manipulation was no longer just about gaining his trust, it was about ensuring he had no one else to turn to. The stage was set for the next phase of their plan, and Robert had no idea that the nieces he relied on so completely were the architects of his growing despair. Ava and Lily were meticulous in executing the next phase of their plan. With Robert now fully dependent on them, the sisters began orchestrating a series of events designed to heighten his paranoia and further weaken his already fragile state. The twins understood that fear was a powerful tool, and they wielded it with precision. They wanted Robert to feel not just isolated but under constant threat, a man teetering on the edge of disaster. It started with small accidents that seemed plausible but unnerving. One evening, as Robert sat quietly in his cottage, the power suddenly went out. The darkness was suffocating and the silence oppressive. Ava and Lily, conveniently nearby, arrived within minutes, claiming they had noticed the outage from the road. They reassured him that it was likely just a storm affecting the power lines, but in reality, they had cut the electricity themselves to create the scenario. The next incident was even more alarming. Robert woke one morning to the acrid smell of gas filling the house. Panicked, he stumbled outside, coughing and disoriented. Ava and Lily appeared moments later, once again the saviors. They claimed they had come by to check on him and noticed the gas leak. They insisted he had been lucky they arrived when they did and suggested his old appliances might be a safety hazard. In truth, the twins had tampered with the gas line the night before. These staged events escalated over time, always just short of causing serious harm but enough to keep Robert on edge. The goal was clear: make him feel as though the world around him was crumbling, leaving him no choice but to rely entirely on the twins. They carefully balanced the chaos they introduced, ensuring it never raised suspicion but always seemed ominously coincidental. One of the most terrifying moments for Robert came during a routine drive to the local store. He had insisted on going alone, a rare act of independence that the sisters begrudgingly allowed. Halfway to his destination, the brakes on his car failed. He narrowly avoided a serious accident, managing to veer off the road and stop in a ditch. Shaken and trembling, he called the twins, who arrived with a mix of concern and subtle "I told you so" expressions. Unbeknownst to Robert, the brake failure wasn't a random mechanical issue, it was sabotage. Ava had tampered with the car the night before, ensuring the brake lines would fail. It was a calculated risk, but one that paid off. After the incident, Robert stopped driving altogether, relying on the twins to take him anywhere he needed to go. Each incident added another layer to the narrative the sisters were constructing. They repeatedly emphasized that the world was dangerous and unpredictable, and that Robert needed to take precautions. They convinced him to invest in additional security measures for the cottage, including an alarm system that they controlled. They also persuaded him to give them access to his finances, arguing that they needed to manage his accounts in case of an emergency. Robert, exhausted and frightened, agreed without hesitation. He no longer trusted himself to handle anything on his own. His once stable life had become a series of crises, each more unsettling than the last. The twins, always at his side, appeared to be his only lifeline. Behind closed doors, Ava and Lily celebrated their growing control. They were careful to maintain their facade of concern, but their actions were driven by greed. Every step brought them closer to their ultimate goal: complete domination over Robert's life and, more importantly, his fortune. What made their scheme so effective was the psychological toll it took on Robert. The constant fear and uncertainty left him unable to think clearly or question the events unfolding around him. The twins had created an environment where he felt perpetually unsafe, a prisoner in his own home. As Robert's paranoia deepened, Ava and Lily began to prepare for the final stage of their plan. They knew they couldn't keep up the charade forever, and their patience was running thin. The staged accidents, the manipulation, and the isolation were all leading to one inevitable conclusion. The sisters were ready to take the next step, and Robert had no idea just how far they were willing to go. Ava and Lily knew that their carefully orchestrated plan was nearing its conclusion. They had spent months manipulating Robert, isolating him, and feeding his paranoia until he was nothing more than a shadow of his former self. But the final step in their scheme required something far more drastic. They needed to eliminate any possibility of Robert recovering his independence or questioning their actions. The twins decided it was time to frame him for a crime so serious it would destroy his credibility forever. The plan began with meticulous preparation. They staged a break-in at the secluded cottage where Robert now lived. Late one night, under the cover of darkness, they donned gloves and masks, taking care not to leave any evidence behind. They shattered a window, scattered furniture, and rifled through drawers to make it look like a burglar had torn through the house. To anyone else, it would appear as though the home had been ransacked. But this wasn't just about creating chaos. Ava and Lily planted specific items to make it seem as though Robert was involved in illegal activities. They scattered counterfeit bills they had purchased online and hid a fake ledger filled with fabricated financial transactions that suggested money laundering. They also left behind a burner phone with incriminating messages they had written, implicating Robert in a web of fraudulent schemes. Once the scene was set, they called the police anonymously, claiming they had seen suspicious activity at the cottage. By the time the authorities arrived, the house was in disarray, and Robert was utterly confused. The officers discovered the planted evidence and began questioning him. Robert, already consumed by paranoia and fear, struggled to explain. The twins played their roles to perfection, feigning shock and heartbreak as they insisted they had no idea their uncle could be involved in anything illegal. The police investigation unfolded rapidly. The evidence seemed damning, and Robert's erratic behavior only made things worse. He stumbled over his words during questioning, his anxiety making him appear suspicious. The twins, meanwhile, worked behind the scenes to ensure the narrative stayed intact. They provided helpful details to the authorities, subtly steering the investigation toward their desired conclusion. To Robert, it felt as though his world was collapsing. The people he trusted most, his nieces, seemed to be the only ones standing by him, offering comfort and support. They assured him they would help him clear his name, but in reality they were tightening their grip. They encouraged him to sign over power of attorney to them, claiming it was necessary to manage his legal defense. Desperate and overwhelmed, Robert agreed. The stress of the accusations took a severe toll on Robert's health. He became withdrawn and frail, his body failing under the weight of the ordeal. Just 2 days after his arrest, he suffered a fatal heart attack in his jail cell. The twins, upon hearing the news, publicly displayed grief and devastation. Privately, however, they saw this as the final, inevitable step in their plan. With Robert gone, the path to his fortune was clear. The house, the bank accounts, the investments, all of it now belonged to Ava and Lily. They had crafted a seemingly flawless plot, manipulating their uncle into a deadly spiral that left no loose ends. Their calculated cruelty had paid off, and they believed they had gotten away with it. But even the best-laid plans can unravel, and the twins' triumph would prove to be short-lived. For now, though, they reveled in their victory, blissfully unaware of the consequences yet to come. Ava and Lily basked in their victory, confident that their plan had succeeded without a hitch. With Robert gone and his fortune legally transferred into their names, the sisters wasted no time in enjoying their newfound wealth. They sold the secluded cottage and moved into a luxurious penthouse in the city, far from the quiet streets of Camden Falls. To anyone observing them, they were two successful young women living their best lives. But beneath the surface of their polished facade, cracks were beginning to form. The first sign of trouble came when the police reopened their investigation into Robert's death. Initially ruled as a natural cause, Robert's sudden heart attack had raised questions among those closest to him. His former financial advisor, whom the twins had ousted early on, had grown suspicious of the timeline leading up to Robert's demise. He contacted authorities, providing detailed records of Robert's finances and suggesting irregularities that pointed to Ava and Lily. The investigation revealed discrepancies in the timeline the sisters had provided. When officers reviewed security footage from local businesses near Robert's cottage, they found gaps in the twins' alibis on the night of the staged break-in. Additionally, forensic analysis of the burner phone left behind revealed messages that, while incriminating Robert, also hinted at inconsistencies. The language used matched patterns from text messages sent by Ava and Lily in the past. Meanwhile, whispers about the twins' sudden wealth began circulating in Camden Falls. Their extravagant lifestyle didn't sit well with those who remembered Robert as a modest man who rarely flaunted his fortune. Former neighbors and acquaintances began speaking out, mentioning how Ava and Lily had pushed their way into Robert's life in his final months. The twins' carefully constructed image of being doting nieces started to unravel under scrutiny. What truly sealed their fate, however, was a hidden element they had overlooked in their planning. Robert, though paranoid and isolated, had kept a journal during the months Ava and Lily were manipulating him. The journal detailed his growing fears and suspicions, including specific mentions of incidents like the gas leak and the brake failure on his car. While Robert never explicitly accused his nieces, his entries painted a picture of two women who were systematically eroding his sense of security. The journal was discovered during a search of the cottage, which had yet to be fully cleared out following its sale. Investigators pieced together Robert's notes with the mounting evidence against Ava and Lily. The twins, oblivious to the gathering storm, were blindsided when they were arrested on charges of fraud, conspiracy, and manslaughter. The trial was a media sensation, with the twins' glamorous public image contrasting sharply with the sinister allegations against them. Prosecutors detailed how they had manipulated their vulnerable uncle, staging events to frighten him, isolating him from support, and ultimately driving him to a fatal heart attack under the pressure of their scheme. The journal, combined with forensic evidence and witness testimonies, created a damning case. Ava and Lily maintained their innocence throughout the trial, insisting they had only ever cared for Robert. But their carefully woven lies couldn't withstand the weight of the evidence. The jury convicted them on all charges, and the sisters were sentenced to decades in prison. Their fall from grace was as dramatic as their rise, leaving them infamous as the deadly twin manipulators in headlines across the country. In the end, Ava and Lily's greed had not only cost Robert his life but also destroyed their own. Their story became a cautionary tale of how far some will go for wealth and the devastating consequences of unchecked ambition. Far from the luxurious life they had envisioned, the twins were left to face the consequences of their actions, their shared bond now a bitter reminder of their shared downfall.